David Cameron says multiculturalism in Britain has failed. In a speech to a security conference in Munich, he said the UK needed a stronger sense of national identity to prevent people turning to extremism. And he called for people of different faiths and cultures to be more closely integrated into British society. Our chief political correspondent, Laura Kunsberg, reports.
Absolutely not what the Prime Minister means by tackling extremism head-on. But 2,000 of the right-wing English Defence League marched in Luton today. Thousands of miles away, David Cameron told other world leaders that Britain's got it wrong, saying multiculturalism and a hands-off tolerance have simply failed.
When a white person holds objectionable views, racist views for instance, we rightly condemn them. But when equally unacceptable views or practices come from someone who isn't white, we've been too cautious, frankly even fearful, to stand up to them.
Taxpayers' money should be cut off from any group who don't stand up to extremists.
Some organisations that seek to present themselves as a gateway to the Muslim community are showered with public money despite doing little to combat extremism.
The previous government had tried to do just that. But ministers are looking again at who should get public cash. As a counter-protest got underway in a heavily policed Luton, there was anger that the Prime Minister had not condemned what was happening here today.
Today's speech by the Prime Minister falls into the trap of giving a propaganda coup for the EDL. As we've seen fascists walk on our streets today, no mention whatsoever by the Prime Minister about the EDL. And clearly there are going to be people in the Muslim community who will say there seems to be one rule for the EDL and the fascist far right and a separate rule when it comes to Muslims.
The Prime Minister says he wants everyone who lives in this country to come together and share a stronger identity. But the reaction to his first speech on the subject has shown how hard that could be.
And Laura joins me now in the studio. Laura, who do we think David Cameron was trying to talk to appeal to today? You know, is it those voters who wouldn't want to align themselves with, for example, the BNP, but who think perhaps that Britishness is being diluted somehow?
I think he was trying to do several things, and let's just take them in turn. Firstly, behind the scenes, ministers are looking at this whole policy area. There's a big review going on of a thing called the Prevent strategy, essentially what the government is trying to do to counter terrorism. That's up and running. It's moving towards the end, the conclusion of the work they're doing. So I think in a sense David Cameron was trying to prepare the ground for some announcements that the government will make about changes to that strategy in the next month or so, although I understand it has been a bit delayed. In part, I think what he was trying to do is appeal to people who might have listened to some of his remarks today and said, yes, I absolutely agree. One of those remarks, for example, saying when people say something racist against somebody from an ethnic minority, that is rightly condemned. But perhaps there might be other areas of society where if it's said the other way round, well, people sometimes hang back. And what he's certainly done is stride very purposefully into an area where politicians sometimes tread very, very timidly. What I think is worth saying, though, is he's not really the first politician to do this. It's his first big speech as Prime Minister on the subject, but there were echoes there, definitely, of things even that Tony Blair said back in 2006 after 7/7. Some echoes, too, of what Gordon Brown, who used to talk about Britishness all the time, this striving for a more common identity, which would be used in part to counter extremism.
As you say, he was trying to do several things. It's a subject that requires a very nuanced approach. Do you think he has moved the debate forward, or from the reaction, has it actually backfired?
Well, I think he's kick-started the debate, to use another metaphor. I think there's no doubt the timing of today was unfortunate. Now, the Munich Security Conference is a big set-piece event. It's been in the diary for an awful long time. It was unfortunate for the Prime Minister, I think, that the EDL, the English Defence League, chose today to try to mount their biggest ever march through the town centre in Luton. Now, Number 10 were very clear. They weren't going to be knocked off course because of the actions of a relatively small protest, 2,000 people or so. But there will be people, and there have been people, we heard Mohammed Shafiq in that report there, who've criticised David Cameron, not for making that speech today, but for not mentioning what was happening in Luton, for not tackling head-on what the EDL were up to today. So while urging people in the Muslim communities around the country to take a stronger line, he didn't mention in his speech what some people would see as the other side of the coin. On that note, there's been a bit of a political spat accompanying all this through the day. The Shadow Justice Minister, Sadiq Khan, who's a very close colleague of Ed Miliband, accused David Cameron of helping the EDL with their propaganda. Now, the Conservatives call on him to apologise. They were, you can see no surprise, they were very upset by that suggestion from Sadiq Khan. He hasn't quite apologised, but he has reissued a different quote saying David Cameron was unwise to give the speech in the manner that he did.
OK, Laura, thank you very much. Laura Kunsberg.